Changing a mixed number to an equivalent fraction with the lowest common denominator. Here we have two fractions, and they have a common denominator of 5 and 15. So the first thing we want to do is, what is the least common denominator between 5 and 15? Well, since we know that 5 is a factor of 15, then therefore the least common denominator is 15. Now for step 2, what we want to do is, since the denominator is already 15 for this fraction, we want to take this mixed number, which is 1 3/5, and we want to convert that into an improper fraction. So recall that if we take 5 and multiply that by 1, and then we're going to add that to 3 to give us our improper fraction. So 5 times 1 is 5, plus 3 is going to give us 8 in the numerator, and that's divided by 5. Okay, now the next step is, we want to rewrite this now with a common denominator, least common denominator of 15. So if we take 15 and divide it by the denominator in step 3, which is 5, 15 divided by 5 is 3. So therefore, that means that 5 times 3 is going to give us 15. And then we're going to multiply 3 by the numerator as well. So therefore, 8 times 3 is going to give us 24. So therefore, the equivalent fraction with the lowest common denominator is going to be 24 over 15. So now let's try a couple more examples here. Okay. So in this case here, we have 1 3/4 and 5/12. So the first thing we need to determine is, what is the LCD? And we can see that between 4 and 12, we know that 4 is a factor of 12, and therefore 12 is going to be the least common denominator. Now in step 2, we want to take that mixed number of 1 3/4 and turn it into an improper fraction. So we get 4 times 1 and then plus 3. So therefore, 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is going to give us 7 over 4. Now again, we want to convert it to the least common denominator of 12. So we know that our new fraction is going to have a denominator of 12. Then we need to ask ourselves, 12 divided by 4 gives us 3. So that means that 4 times 3 is going to give us 12. And then we have to do the same thing to the numerator. So 7 times 3 is going to give us 21. So the equivalent fraction is going to be 21 over 12. Okay, let's take a look at example 2. We have 3 2/3 and 4/9. So the first thing we want to do is find the least common denominator between 3 and 9. Well, since 3 is a factor of 9, we know that 9 is the least common denominator. Now in step 2, we're going to take this mixed number of 3 2/3 and rewrite it as an improper fraction. So we're going to take 3 and multiply that by 3, and then we're going to add the 2. So again, let's go ahead and do that. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11, so that is 11 over 3. And so now what we want to do is we want to convert it to an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 9. So we're going to write down 9 here, and then we're going to ask ourselves, 9 divided by 3 is 3. So we're going to take 3 times 3, which is going to give us 9, and then we're going to do the same thing to the numerator, which is 11. So 11 times 3 is going to give us 33. And therefore, that is an equivalent fraction to 4/9. Okay, now let's try one more example here. So we have another example where we have the mixed number 3 1/2 and the fraction 2/3. So you can see here that we have two different denominators. So the first thing is, what is the least common denominator between 2 and 3? Well, they're both prime numbers. So if we take 2 and multiply it by 3, then it's going to give us an LCD of 6. So that means we're going to have to convert both fractions to the LCD. So for the second step of the mixed number, we have 3 1/2. And we want to convert this into an improper fraction. So we're going to take 2 and multiply it by 3, and then add the 1. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is going to give us 7 over 2. Now the least common denominator is 6. And then we're going to ask ourselves, what is 6 divided by 2? It's 3. That means that 2 times 3 is going to give us 6. And then we're going to multiply that number by 7 as well. So 7 times 3 is now going to give us 21. Okay, now let's take a look at the other fraction. In step 2, we have the fraction 2 over 3. So we don't need to convert it into an improper fraction because it's already a proper fraction. So now what we want to do is we want to find out what is the equivalent fraction with the new denominator of 6. So again, 6 divided by 3 is 2. So that means that 3 times 2 is going to give us 6. And therefore, we're going to do the same thing to the numerator. So 2 times 2 is going to give us 4. So that fraction is 4 over 6. So that means that 21 over 6 and 4 over 6 now share a common denominator, and 2/3 and 4/6 are equivalent, and 3.5 and 21 over 6 are equivalent. Okay, next, let's try and find the equivalent fractions for 3/4, 1/8, and 5/12. Okay, so in step 1, what we want to be able to do is find the LCD of all 3 of those denominators. So we have 4, 8, and 12. We want to find the LCD between 4, 8, and 12. Well, the prime factorization of 4 is 2 times 2. The prime factorization of 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. And the prime factorization of 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. And so now what we're going to do is we're just going to bring down what they have in common. So we know that they have 1, 2 in common. They have another 2 in common. We have to include another 2 from the 8, and we have to include a 3 from the 12. So when we multiply this all out, 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 is going to equal 24. So now let's turn in each fraction to an equivalent of the common denominator. So again, in step 1, we know that the LCD already between 4, 8, and 12 is 24. And so in step 2, we write the fraction of 3/4. And what we want to do is find an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 24. So we're going to take those denominators of 24 and 4. 24 divided by 4 is 6. So that means that 4 times 6 is going to give us 24. We're going to do the same thing to the numerator. So 3 times 6 is going to give us 18. So therefore, 18 over 24 is equivalent to 3/4. Again, let's take a look at this first step. Well, this first step again tells us that the LCD is 24. So for step 2, we're going to write that fraction out of 1 over 8. And we want to write it as an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 24. So again, 24 divided by 8 is 3. So that means 8 times 3 is going to give us 24. And we're going to multiply it by the numerator as well. So 1 times 3 is going to give us 3. So therefore, the equivalent fraction of 1/8 is 3 over 24. Okay, the last fraction is 5/12. Again, we know that the LCD is 24. And then in step 2, we're going to rewrite that fraction of 5/12. And then we want to find an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 24. So 24 divided by 12 is 2. So that means 12 times 2 is going to give us 24. And then we're going to multiply the numerator by the same number. So 5 times 2 is going to give us 10. So therefore, that equivalent fraction is 10 over 24.